I stood at the counter of Valley Trust Bank, holding my debit card like it might burn my fingers. The property tax bill was due in 3 days, and I'd come in to make sure the payment went through smoothly. The teller, a young woman named Amy, swiped my card twice. Her face shifted from professional to uncomfortable. I'm sorry, but this card is declined, she said quietly. I frowned. That can't be right. Try the other account. I handed her my backup card, the joint savings Richard and I had maintained for emergencies. She swiped it. Same result. Amy glanced at her manager, who walked over with a tight expression. Mrs. Hale, the manager said softly, all your joint accounts show a zero balance. My stomach dropped. Zero. That's impossible. We had over $40,000. She hesitated, then leaned in. Your husband came in yesterday. He had divorce paperwork with him. The fluorescent lights suddenly felt too bright. My hands started shaking. Richard hadn't said a word to me about divorce. We'd just celebrated our 41st anniversary last month. I walked to my car in a daze, fumbling with my keys. 41 years. 4 decades of marriage, 2 children raised, a career I'd given up to support his business dreams. I slid into the driver's seat and sat there, staring at the steering wheel. My phone was in my purse. I pulled it out and called Richard. It rang 4 times before he picked up. What is it? He asked, his voice flat. The bank accounts are empty, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Richard, what's going on? Silence. Then, coldly, it's legal, Claire. I consulted my attorney. You should talk to one too. Legal. You drained our accounts without telling me. Talk to a lawyer. The line went dead. I sat there for 20 minutes, replaying every moment of our life together. The sacrifices. The trust. The assumption that we were building something together. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my ribs. I finally started the car and drove home, my vision blurring with tears. When I checked my purse, I had exactly $112 in cash. At home, I opened my laptop and logged into our bank portal. Richard had changed all the passwords. I tried our anniversary date, his birthday, the kids' names. Nothing worked. A cold wave of panic washed over me. I walked through the house in a fog. In the kitchen, I found a note taped to the fridge, written in Richard's neat handwriting. I'll have my attorney contact you. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Don't make this harder. I hadn't even known there was a this to make harder. I checked the mail. 3 bills were overdue, electric, water, and internet. All were in my name because Richard had insisted years ago that it would help my credit. Now I understood. He'd been planning this. My phone buzzed. An email from a law firm, Brennan and Associates. The subject line read, Legal representation for Richard Hale, dissolution of marriage. I opened it with trembling hands. The message was formal, cold. It informed me that Richard had retained counsel and that I should do the same. There was an attachment, a preliminary settlement proposal that offered me $1,842. The next morning, I sat in the office of Patricia Vance, Richard's attorney. She was younger than me, sharp-suited, with an expression that made me feel like a bug under glass. Mrs. Hale, she began, her tone dripping with false sympathy. You should understand that joint accounts are exactly that, joint. Either party can withdraw funds. Your husband acted within his legal rights. But I didn't know, I said. Doesn't that matter? She shrugged. Morally, perhaps. Legally, no. You should have planned better. Perhaps you could look into assistance programs for women in transition. Assistance programs. Like I was some charity case. I felt my face flush with anger and humiliation. Our assets, I said slowly. You mean our assets, not just his. Mr. Hale built his business, she replied coolly. He's simply protecting what's his. I left that office feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. But as I sat in my car, something shifted. Protecting what's his. Not ours. His. I pulled out my phone and searched for divorce attorneys. I met with a lawyer named Thomas Brenner 2 days later. He was kind, patient, But his words were brutal. "Mrs. Hale, I'll be honest with you. This happens more often than you'd think. Joint accounts can be drained before filing, and recovery is difficult. The courts move slowly, and by the time we get a hearing, months could pass. So I just lose everything." My voice cracked. He sighed. "Not everything. But your husband has positioned himself well. He's got liquid assets, business accounts, and legal representation already in motion. We'll fight, but I need you to prepare for a long battle." I left his office feeling erased. Disposable. 41 years, reduced to a courtroom fight over scraps. I drove home slowly, my mind churning with despair. How had I missed the signs? How had I become so financially invisible? That evening, a voicemail notification appeared on my phone. It was from the bank manager, Helen Torres. "Mrs. Hale, could you come back to the branch tomorrow? There's something we need to discuss." Helen Torres met me in a private office at the back of the bank. She had a folder in front of her, and her expression was uneasy. "Mrs. Hale, after you left the other day, something didn't sit right with me. I reviewed your account history more carefully." She paused. "Your husband withdrew funds from accounts that weren't entirely joint. Some of those transfers went through an older account tied exclusively to your name." I blinked. "What account?" "It's listed here as a legacy account, opened in 1986. Does that ring a bell?" My heart skipped. My mother made me open that account. She said I should always have something of my own, just in case. But I barely used it. Helen nodded. "Your husband routed money through that account without proper authorization. That's triggered an internal review." "A review?" "Yes. Bank policy requires us to investigate transfers involving accounts with single ownership when the account holder doesn't initiate the transaction." She met my eyes. "I wanted you to know." I drove home in a daze, trying to remember that old account. My mother had insisted on it decades ago, back when I was newly married. "Just in case," she'd said, with a look I didn't understand at the time. I'd deposited a few paychecks there in the early years, then forgotten about it. How had Richard even accessed it? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Helen's words, "without proper authorization." What did that mean, exactly? The next morning, Richard filed for divorce officially. I received the papers by courier. They painted me as financially dependent, confused, and incapable of managing assets. Reading them felt like being punched in the stomach. By afternoon, mutual friends stopped calling. His narrative was spreading. Poor Claire, lost without him. I felt invisible again, like a ghost in my own life. But then my phone buzzed. Another call from Helen Torres. "Mrs. Hale, the compliance department has flagged your husband's withdrawals. This is bigger than I thought." Richard moved fast. Within a week, he'd moved in with a woman named Vanessa, someone I'd never heard of. She was younger, polished, and apparently had been in his life for months. The betrayal cut deeper than the money. His attorney filed motions portraying me as unstable, claiming I couldn't be trusted with finances. Friends who'd known us for years started avoiding me. At the grocery store, I ran into our neighbor, Paul, who looked at me with pity and hurried away. I felt erased from my own social circle. But Helen Torres kept calling. The bank's compliance department was reviewing 10 years of account activity, she explained. They'd found irregularities, transfers that didn't follow standard protocol, withdrawals that required dual authorization but only had one signature. "We need you to stay quiet about this," Helen said. "Don't alert your husband. Just let the investigation run its course." For the first time since this nightmare began, I stopped reacting. I stopped crying. I just watched and waited. A bank investigator named Marcus Holt contacted me directly. He was methodical, calm, and asked detailed questions about my marriage, my finances, and my account activity. "Mrs. Hale, did your husband ever pressure you to sign documents without reading them?" he asked. I paused, then the memories flooded back. Countless nights, Richard shoving papers in front of me at the kitchen table. "Just routine," he'd say. "Tax stuff. Sign here." I'd been so trusting. So stupid. Yes, I whispered. All the time. Marcus made a note. Did you ever review full bank statements? I shook my head. He handled all that. He said it was easier if he managed the finances. Easier for him, Marcus muttered. He pulled out a document. Mrs. Hale, I need you to look at this signature. Is this yours? I stared at the paper. The signature read Claire Hale, but the handwriting was wrong. Too slanted. The loops were different. My stomach turned cold. No, that's not my signature. The forged signature changed everything. Marcus Holt escalated the investigation immediately. If Richard had forged my name on financial documents, that wasn't just unethical, it was fraud. I sat in my living room that night, numb. How many documents had he forged? How long had he been planning this? My phone rang. It was Richard. The first time he'd called since hanging up on me weeks ago. Claire, we need to talk, he said, his voice tight. About what? This bank nonsense. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Let's settle this privately, like adults. I said nothing. I just listened to him breathe on the other end of the line, clearly waiting for me to cave, to apologize, to make this easier for him. Claire, he pressed. Talk to my lawyer, I said quietly, then hung up. The next day, I heard through mutual friends that Vanessa had moved out of Richard's condo. Apparently, she didn't enjoy dating a man under investigation for fraud. Richard's attorney filed an emergency motion to limit my access to any remaining funds, claiming I was financially unstable and might drain accounts out of spite. The irony was almost funny. The judge scheduled a hearing for the following week. Helen Torres called again. Mrs. Hale, the bank is requesting permission to submit evidence to the court. We found significant irregularities in how your accounts were managed. We want the judge to see them. What kind of irregularities? Transfers between business and personal accounts, commingling funds, which is illegal. Withdrawals that required spousal consent but were executed with only one signature. And several forged authorizations. My heart pounded. You're sure? We're sure. The bank takes fraud very seriously. We're filing a formal report. The hearing arrived quickly. Richard sat on one side of the courtroom with Patricia Vance, looking confident and composed. I sat on the other side with Thomas Brenner, feeling like my entire life was on trial. The judge, a stern woman named Phyllis Carter, reviewed the motions carefully. Then she looked up. I see the bank has requested to submit evidence. I'll allow it. The bank's evidence was devastating. Marcus Holt presented 10 years of account activity, highlighting transfers that violated banking regulations. Richard had moved money between business and personal accounts, artificially inflating his income during profitable years and hiding funds during lean ones. Worse, several withdrawals from my legacy account required spousal consent I'd never given. The courtroom was silent as Marcus walked through document after document. Richard's confident expression faded with each revelation. Judge Carter leaned forward. Mr. Hale, these records indicate you accessed your wife's personal account without authorization. Did you forge her signature? Patricia Vance stood. Your Honor, my client denies. I'm asking Mr. Hale, Judge Carter interrupted sharply. Richard stammered. There must be some mistake. Claire knew about those accounts. That's not what the evidence shows. Judge Carter closed the folder. I'm ordering a full forensic audit of all joint and individual accounts tied to this marriage. Until that audit is complete, all accounts are frozen. Richard's face turned red. You can't. I just did, Judge Carter said coldly. Court adjourned. The next week was chaos. Richard called me 3 times in 2 days, each time more desperate than the last. His business accounts were frozen. He couldn't access payroll. Clients were asking questions. Claire, please, he said on the 3rd call. This is getting out of hand. Let's settle privately. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Like you took care of me by draining our accounts? I asked. Silence. Richard, you did this. Not me. You planned this for months, maybe years. You forged my signature. You hid money. You lied. My voice was steady, calm. Now deal with the consequences. He hung up. The next day, Vanessa left him for good. I heard she'd posted something online about dishonest men and financial nightmares. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired. But something else was shifting. Friends who'd ghosted me started reaching out. "Claire, we didn't know," they said. "We're so sorry." The truth was coming out, and Richard's carefully constructed image was crumbling. The forensic audit took 3 weeks. When the report came back, it was worse than anyone expected. Richard had hidden income for years, declaring me as a dependent on tax forms while secretly funneling money into offshore accounts. He'd manipulated financial statements to make himself look poorer than he was, all while controlling every dollar I touched. Thomas Brenner called me into his office. "Claire, this is a clear case of financial abuse. The auditor found evidence of deliberate manipulation going back over a decade." "What does that mean?" "It means the court will likely rule in your favor, significantly. Richard didn't just drain accounts. He systematically erased you from your own financial life." 2 days later, Judge Carter froze Richard's remaining accounts, including his business operating funds. His attorney filed motions arguing this would destroy his livelihood. The judge was unmoved. "Mr. Hale destroyed his wife's financial security," she said in court. "He can experience what that feels like." For the first time since this started, Richard looked genuinely scared. Judge Carter awarded me temporary spousal support, enough to cover my bills and legal fees. It wasn't everything, but it was something. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. In court, Richard's attorney argued that the bank's investigation was biased, that the forensic audit was excessive. Judge Carter reprimanded them both. "Mr. Hale engaged in financial manipulation and possible fraud," she said sharply. "This court takes such behavior very seriously. If you continue to obstruct this process, I will hold you in contempt." Richard looked small, diminished. His perfectly tailored suit couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. As we left the courtroom, Thomas pulled me aside. "Claire, there's something else. The auditor found records showing you contributed unpaid labor to Richard's business for years. You're listed in old accounting files as an uncompensated contributor." I blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means you might have a legal claim to partial ownership." My heart skipped. "Ownership?" "Yes. We're filing the claim today." The ownership claim hit Richard like a freight train. His business, the one thing he'd built his entire identity around, was suddenly at risk. His attorney filed motion after motion, arguing that I'd been a housewife, not a business partner. But the records told a different story. For 15 years, I'd managed his scheduling, handled client communications, processed invoices, and maintained filing systems, all without pay, all while being told it was just helping out. Thomas presented those records in court. Emails, calendars, client testimonials mentioning me by name. The evidence was undeniable. Judge Carter reviewed the documents carefully. "Mrs. Hale, can you describe your role in your husband's business?" I took a deep breath. I managed everything behind the scenes. Scheduling, billing, client follow-ups. Richard handled the public-facing work, but I kept the business running. "And were you compensated?" "No, Your Honor." She nodded slowly. "I see." She turned to Richard. "Mr. Hale, why wasn't your wife on payroll?" Richard stammered. "She didn't want to be. She preferred to focus on the home." "That's a lie," I said quietly. "I asked multiple times to be paid. You said it wasn't necessary." Judge Carter's expression hardened. "I'll take this under advisement." Richard's reputation, carefully built over decades, began to crumble. Word spread through local business circles. Whispers about financial manipulation, fraud investigations, marital betrayal. Clients started leaving, citing ethical concerns. He blamed me, of course. In a motion filed by his attorney, he accused me of vindictiveness, of trying to destroy him out of spite. Thomas showed me the filing. "He's desperate," he said. "This is a Hail Mary. Don't let it rattle you." It didn't. I was past being rattled. I'd spent weeks watching Richard squirm, watching his carefully constructed facade collapse. I felt nothing but cold resolve. In court, Richard's attorney argued that I was driven by revenge, that I'd orchestrated this entire investigation to punish him. Judge Carter looked unimpressed. "Counsel, your client drained joint accounts, forged signatures, and hid income. Mrs. Hale didn't orchestrate anything. She simply told the truth. If that truth is damaging to your client, perhaps he should have behaved better." The courtroom went silent. Richard's face turned red. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. The final hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning. I dressed carefully, nothing flashy, just simple and dignified. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted to tell my truth. In court, Richard testified first. His attorney led him through a carefully rehearsed story. I'd been difficult, financially irresponsible, emotionally unstable. He painted himself as a long-suffering husband who'd finally reached his breaking point. But under cross-examination, his story fell apart. Thomas asked simple questions: dates, amounts, account numbers. Richard contradicted himself repeatedly. He claimed he'd never accessed my legacy account, then admitted he had. He said I'd known about the withdrawals, then couldn't produce any evidence. Bank records dismantled his lies one by one. I watched him unravel, piece by piece. When it was my turn to testify, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply answered questions honestly, calmly. I described our marriage, my sacrifices, my unpaid labor. I explained how I'd trusted him completely, and how that trust had been weaponized against me. The contrast was devastating. Richard had been defensive, angry. I was composed, truthful. The difference was obvious. Judge Carter asked Richard one final question. "Mr. Hale, if you believed your wife was financially irresponsible, why did you give her access to joint accounts for 41 years? Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. He glanced at his attorney, who looked equally stumped. I trusted her," he finally said. "But you just testified that she was irresponsible and unstable," Judge Carter said coldly. "Which is it?" Silence filled the courtroom. Richard's face flushed red. He had no answer. Judge Carter closed her folder. "I've heard enough. I'll issue my ruling next week." We filed out of the courtroom in silence. Richard avoided my eyes. His attorney looked grim. Thomas squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. "You did great," he whispered. I nodded, feeling strangely calm. Whatever happened next, I'd told my truth. That had to count for something. The ruling came 7 days later. Thomas called me at 9 a.m. "Claire, you need to sit down." I Saturday. "What is it?" "The judge ruled in your favor on almost everything. She found that Richard engaged in financial abuse, fraud, and deliberate manipulation. You're being awarded full restitution for the drained accounts, half the business valuation, penalties for the forged signatures, and all your legal fees." My hands shook. "How much?" "Including the business valuation. Just over $200,000. I couldn't breathe. 200,000. More than Richard had left me with. More than I'd dared to hope for. "There's more," Thomas said. Judge Carter issued a formal rebuke. "It's part of the public record. Richard's attorney also resigned. She doesn't want to be associated with the case anymore." I hung up and sat in silence for a long time. Justice. Real, tangible justice. After weeks of feeling erased, invisible, powerless, I'd won. Richard was forced to sell assets to pay the court's judgment. His business struggled without the clients who'd left. His reputation, once pristine, was shattered. I heard through mutual friends that he'd tried to appeal the ruling, but his new attorney advised against it. The evidence was too damning. One afternoon, he called me. "Claire, can we talk? In person?" I hesitated, then agreed. "Fine. But at a public place. The coffee shop on Main Street. Tomorrow at 2. He showed up looking older, thinner. We sat across from each other, Two strangers who'd once shared a life. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I waited. "Not for everything," he clarified, "but for how it went down. I didn't think it would get this messy." "You mean you didn't think you'd get caught?" I said. He didn't deny it. "I just want to move forward. Can we do that?" I studied his face. He wasn't apologizing for betraying me. He was apologizing for the consequences of getting caught. "Thank you for teaching me something," I said. He blinked. "What?" "That I should never disappear again." I stood and walked out of that coffee shop without looking back. Richard called after me, but I didn't stop. There was nothing left to say. Over the next few months, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I moved into a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Small, but mine. I reopened accounts in my maiden name, Claire Donovan. Every dollar that came in or went out, I controlled. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, teaching financial literacy workshops for women over 50. I shared my story, not for pity, but to warn others. Always have your own account, I told them. Always know where your money is. Trust, but verify. The women listened with wide eyes, some nodding, some crying. I understood. I'd been them. One evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset. My phone buzzed with a message from my daughter, Emily. "Mom, I'm so proud of you." I smiled. Proud. Not pitying. Not worried. Proud. I'd spent 41 years believing that partnership meant giving up control, that love meant blind trust. Richard had taught me the opposite. Real partnership requires transparency. Real love doesn't weaponize vulnerability. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate required energy I didn't want to waste. I just moved on. I started taking art classes, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I reconnected with old friends, joined a book club, traveled to places I'd only dreamed of. For the first time in decades, my life was mine. People sometimes asked if I regretted staying silent for so long, if I wished I'd seen the signs earlier. I didn't waste time on regret. I'd learned the lesson I needed to learn. That was enough. A year after the divorce was finalized, I attended a financial literacy conference as a guest speaker. I told my story to a room full of women, explaining how I'd been financially erased and how I'd fought back. "He thought draining our accounts would end me," I said, looking out at the audience. "It was the first thing that ever set me free." The applause was overwhelming. Afterward, women approached me with their own stories, some worse than mine, some eerily similar. We exchanged contact information, forming a small network of survivors. One woman, close to my age, hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought I was the only one." "You're not," I said. "You never were." Today, I'm 63 years old. I live in my small house with a garden I planted myself. I have enough money to live comfortably, thanks to the court's ruling and careful budgeting. I have friends, hobbies, and a sense of purpose. Richard reached out once more, a few months ago, asking if we could be civil for the sake of our children. I politely declined. Our children are adults, they don't need us to perform civility for their benefit. I'm not bitter. Bitterness would mean he still had power over me. Instead, I'm awake. I see clearly now what I couldn't see before, that I'd made myself small to accommodate someone who didn't deserve it. I fund that financial literacy workshop twice a year now, using part of the settlement money. It's my way of turning pain into purpose. He thought draining our accounts would end me. He thought I'd crumble, beg, disappear. Instead, I learned to stand. I learned that my voice mattered. I learned that justice, though slow, is real. And in the end, his betrayal didn't destroy me. It was the first thing that ever set me free.